The room went silent the moment the heart monitor flatlined. A powerful surgeon stood over the patient, shaking his head, ready to call the time of death. Then the quiet nurse everyone ignored stepped forward. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't ask for permission. She moved like someone who had seen death before and refused to let it win again. What happened next shattered careers, exposed lies, and reminded an entire hospital that courage doesn't always wear a title. What happens next will make you believe in quiet miracles and second chances for the forgotten. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. And if you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. San Diego at night was not the city shown on postcards. When the sun disappeared behind the Pacific, the air grew sharp and damp, carried inland by a restless ocean wind. Fog rolled in low from the harbor, blurring streetlights and softening the edges of buildings until everything looked half erased. Cargo ships moved silently in the distance, their lights drifting across the water like slow, indifferent stirs. Harborview Coast Medical Center stood at the edge of that darkness, a massive concrete structure overlooking the bay. Its windows glowed with sterile white light, and above it, the red beacons of the helipad blinked steadily, patient and unfeeling. Ambulances arrived in waves, tires hissing against wet pavement, sirens rising and falling like a warning the city had learned to ignore. Inside the emergency department, time moved differently. There were no nights here, only shifts. No silence, only brief pauses between alarms. The air smelled of antiseptic, latex, and old coffee. Monitors beeped, doors slid open and shut, and voices overlapped in a language shaped by urgency and fatigue. At 2:37 a.m., Elena Cross was on her knees, wiping blood from the floor of Trauma Bay 3. She worked with slow precision, guiding the mop in straight lines, careful not to splash the diluted red across the white tile. The patient had already been taken upstairs. Motorcycle collision, multiple fractures, alive, but barely. What remained was the evidence. Elena erased it without expression, as if this were the most ordinary task in the world. She was of average height, lean without looking fragile. Her dark brown hair was pulled back into a tight, low bun that never loosened, no matter how long the shift lasted. Her face was pale, not sickly, but worn thin, as though it had learned long ago not to expect rest. When she kept her head down, which was most of the time, it was easy to miss her eyes entirely. When she did look up, they were gray and flat, like water under a storm-heavy sky. Elena wore oversized blue scrubs that hid the shape of her body. The sleeves reached farther down her arms than necessary. Even in the overheated ER, she never rolled them up. Her movements were economical, nothing wasted, nothing rushed. Most of the staff barely noticed her. Those who did remembered only what stood out: the silence, the night shifts, the way she took on the tasks others quietly avoided. She cleaned rooms after violent cases. She restocked supplies without being asked. She never complained, never lingered at the nurse's station to gossip or vent. To many, she was simply background. When Elena finished mopping, she rinsed the mop head, wrung it out, and returned it to the utility closet. The trauma bay was quiet now, the monitor still pulsing faintly, forgotten. She shut it off and stepped into the hallway. At the nurse's station, Sarah Mitchell leaned back in her chair and rubbed her neck with one hand. Sarah was in her early 40s, tall and slightly broad-shouldered, with sandy blonde hair cut into a practical bob that framed a tired but kind face. Years in emergency medicine had left fine lines around her eyes and a calm authority in her posture. She had the voice of someone who had learned how to sound reassuring, even when she wasn't. "You don't have to do that yourself," Sarah said when she saw Elena pass with a box of supplies. "Housekeeping comes through in the morning." Elena stopped and set the box down neatly beside the station. It was faster this way. Sarah studied her for a moment. There was something about Elena that made people pause. Not fear exactly, but distance, like standing near deep water without being able to see the bottom. "You've been on your feet all night," Sarah said. "You should sit for a minute." Elena shook her head once. "I'm fine." That was all. She turned toward the supply room. Conversation closed. Across the station, Megan Hill typed rapidly at a computer terminal, her ponytail bouncing as she leaned closer to the screen. Megan was 26, slim, with fair skin and bright auburn hair that never quite stayed in place. She wore pink accented scrubs and patterned socks, small flashes of color in an otherwise muted environment. Her energy was constant, even at this hour, fueled by anxiety as much as caffeine. Megan lowered her voice as Elena walked away. "Does she ever talk to you?" Sarah smiled faintly. "Sometimes." "Like, more than one sentence?" Megan asked. "Not really." Megan frowned, glancing toward the supply room door. "I tried asking where she worked before coming here. She just looked at me. Not rude, just blank." Sarah shrugged. "Some people keep their lives separate. Or they're hiding something," Megan said, half joking, half not. Sarah didn't answer. She had learned that speculation rarely led anywhere good. Inside the supply room, Elena closed the door and rested her hands on the metal counter. The room hummed with refrigeration units and fluorescent lights. Shelves were lined with gloves, syringes, IV kits, and sealed instrument packs, all labeled and aligned. Her hands were steady. They had always been steady. She stared at her reflection in the stainless steel surface, distorted by scratches and fingerprints. For a brief moment, the hum in the room shifted in her mind, stretching into a distant mechanical roar. Rotor blades, wind tearing at metal, a memory that never arrived all at once, only in fragments. Elena inhaled slowly, then exhaled. The sound faded. The door to the emergency department swung open hard. Footsteps approached, confident and unhurried. Dr. Matthew Cole entered the ER like a man who expected the room to adjust itself around him. He was 47, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair touched by gray at the temples. His face was sharply defined, strong jaw, straight nose, clean-shaven, and set into a permanent expression of controlled impatience. His white coat was immaculate, as if stains avoided him out of respect. Even in the middle of the night, he looked composed, alert, ready to be seen. Cole thrived on control, on being the center of gravity in every room he entered. A surgical resident followed a step behind, carrying a tablet and struggling to keep up. "What's Bay 2?" Cole asked without looking back. "Stable," the resident said. "CT is pending," Cole interrupted, "which means nothing." His gaze swept the department, assessing, judging. It paused briefly on Sarah, then Megan, then landed on Elena as she exited the supply room with a sealed suture kit. "Cross," Cole said. Elena stopped immediately. "Yes, doctor." "You're behind on restocking," Cole said. "Bay 4 needs a full suture kit." "I restocked it earlier," Elena replied calmly. Cole raised an eyebrow, a faint smile touching his lips. "Then do it again." Clearly it wasn't done properly. Sarah opened her mouth, then closed it. Megan stared at her screen. Elena nodded once. "I'll handle it." Cole watched her walk away, a quiet satisfaction settling in his chest. Order restored, hierarchy confirmed. What he didn't notice was the way Elena's shoulders squared slightly as she moved down the hall. She entered Bay 4 and placed the kit on the counter. She checked expiration dates, packaging seals, needle sizes, everything aligned, everything ready. For a moment, she stood beside the empty bed. This was supposed to be simple work, quiet work, a place where the rules were written down, where chaos followed patterns, where lives were saved without gunfire or debris. She adjusted the sleeves of her scrubs, ensuring they covered her wrists completely. Outside, the fog pressed closer against the hospital walls. Another ambulance pulled into the bay, siren fading as the doors opened. The night was building towards something, and Elena Cross still had not looked up. Dr. Matthew Cole believed hospitals functioned best when fear traveled faster than compassion. It kept people sharp, obedient, efficient. At least, that was how he justified it to himself as he strode down the main corridor of Harborview Coast Medical Center, white coat flaring slightly behind him like a banner of rank. The early morning fog pressed against the windows, turning the outside world into a dull gray blur. But inside the hospital, everything was harshly lit and uncomfortably clear. Cole was a striking man in a way that demanded attention. He stood just over 6 feet tall, broad across the shoulders, with the posture of someone who had never learned to yield space. His hair, dark and thick, was combed neatly back, the silver at his temples less a sign of age than of authority. His face was all sharp angles, high cheekbones, a straight nose, a jawline that looked carved rather than grown. He kept himself clean-shaven, not out of necessity, but because he liked the way it made him look controlled, untouchable. His eyes, a cold hazel, rarely softened when he spoke to staff. They measured, they judged. To patients, he was charming. To administrators, invaluable. To everyone beneath him, he was a reminder of how easily power could turn cruel. The night shift staff felt his presence long before he spoke. Conversations quieted. Movements became more deliberate. Even the air at the nurses' station seemed to tighten as he approached. Sarah Mitchell straightened in her chair when she saw him coming. She had worked with Cole long enough to recognize his moods, and tonight he carried himself with a particular edge. His steps were faster, his jaw set tighter than usual. That meant something had gone wrong upstairs, or somewhere else in the building, where mistakes were less visible and easier to blame on others. "Dr. Cole," Sarah said evenly, "trauma's been quiet for the last—" "I didn't ask for a report," Cole cut in without slowing. "Where's the charge nurse for Bay 4? Sarah hesitated for half a second. "That would be Elena Cross." Cole stopped walking. He turned slowly, eyes narrowing as if Sarah had just spoken an insult rather than a name. "The quiet one." Sarah held his gaze. "She's been covering the bay all night. No issues." Cole's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile if there had been warmth behind it. "We'll see." He moved past her, heading toward Bay 4 with purpose. Sarah exhaled through her nose and glanced at Megan Hill, who had gone very still beside her computer. Megan's fingers hovered over the keyboard, forgotten. "He's hunting," Megan whispered. Sarah didn't respond, but the tension in her shoulders said she agreed. Bay 4 was empty when Cole entered, the bed stripped and clean, equipment neatly arranged. Elena stood at the counter, labeling syringes with careful handwriting. She turned when she heard his footsteps, her expression neutral. "Doctor," she said. Cole's gaze swept over the room, lingering on the orderly layout. "You missed a blood pressure cuff," he said, pointing at the wall. Elena followed his gesture. "It's in the drawer below the monitor." The wall mount was cracked. Cole opened the drawer, found the cuff, and paused. For a brief moment, something like irritation flickered across his face. He closed the drawer harder than necessary. "You should have reported it," he said. "I logged it in maintenance," Elena replied. Her voice remained even, but she met his eyes this time, just long enough to make the point. Cole didn't like that. He stepped closer, invading her space. He smelled faintly of cologne layered over antiseptic, a combination that made his presence impossible to ignore. "Next time," he said quietly, "speak up before I have to correct you." Elena nodded once. "Understood." Cole watched her for another second, searching for something. Defiance. Fear. Apology. He found none of it. Whatever satisfaction he had hoped to draw from the exchange didn't come. It irritated him more than he cared to admit. As he turned to leave, a stretcher burst through the ER doors, pushed by two paramedics moving at a near run. The patient was a teenage boy, pale and bleeding from a deep gash along his thigh, eyes wide with shock. "Bay 4, one of the paramedics shouted. "Severe laceration, possible arterial bleed." Cole reacted instantly, the practiced efficiency of years in trauma surgery snapping into place. "Pressure now," he ordered. "Get suction ready." Elena moved without being told, grabbing gloves and positioning herself at the side of the bed. Her hands were steady as she applied pressure, her focus narrowing to the wound, the flow of blood, the patient's breathing. The rest of the room seemed to fade. The boy whimpered, his fingers clawing at the sheets. "Am I gonna die?" he asked, voice cracking. "No," Elena said quietly, without looking up. "You're not." Something in her tone, flat, certain, cut through the panic. The boy's grip loosened slightly. Cole noticed. He didn't comment on it, but the moment lodged itself somewhere in the back of his mind. They stabilized the patient quickly. The bleeding slowed. The stretcher was rolled toward imaging, the crisis downgraded from immediate to manageable. As the room emptied, Cole removed his gloves and tossed them into the bin. "You're efficient," he said to Elena, as if it were a casual observation rather than reluctant praise. "Thank you, doctor." The answer came too fast, too automatic. Cole's eyes narrowed again. He didn't like that either. As he left the bay, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He checked the screen and frowned. A missed call from upstairs. Another from administration. Irritation flared. Cole had learned long ago that anger, when applied correctly, could be useful. It kept people off balance. It reminded them who held the authority. Tonight, it felt closer to something else. Restlessness, maybe, or the uneasy sense that something in his carefully controlled environment was not behaving as expected. In the staff lounge, he poured himself coffee he didn't need and barely tasted. He thought of the way Elena had looked at him, not submissive, not confrontational, simply present, as if his approval or disapproval carried no weight with her at all. That was new. Down the hall, Elena washed her hands at the sink, staring at the steady stream of water. The teenage boy's face replayed briefly in her mind, then faded. She dried her hands, pulled her sleeves down again, and returned to the nurse's station. Megan looked up as she approached. "You okay?" she asked, her voice careful. Elena nodded. "Why wouldn't I be?" Megan hesitated, then smiled awkwardly and turned back to her screen. Outside, the fog began to lift slightly, revealing the faint outline of the harbor beyond the hospital walls. The night was moving forward, whether anyone was ready for it or not. And somewhere in the building, Dr. Matthew Cole was beginning to realize that control, once questioned, never returned as easily as it was assumed. The fog had thinned by dawn, retreating toward the harbor in uneven sheets, but the air around Harborview Coast Medical Center remained heavy. Morning light filtered through the windows in a dull, colorless wash, revealing what the night had left behind. Coffee rings on desks, discarded gloves in trash bins, and the quiet fatigue etched into the faces of those who had survived another shift. Elena Cross finished charting at the nurse's station just as the day team began to arrive. Her handwriting was precise, each letter identical to the last, as if shaped by habit rather than thought. She logged the final vitals, signed her name, and capped the pen. The night had passed without further incident, but the sense of waiting had not eased. If anything, it had sharpened. Across the room, Sarah Mitchell was briefing the incoming charge nurse, her voice calm but edged with weariness. Megan Hill hovered nearby, clutching a tablet to her chest, eyes darting between the trauma bays and the ambulance entrance, as if expecting something to come crashing through at any moment. Dr. Matthew Cole appeared at the far end of the corridor, freshly changed, his white coat replaced with a tailored navy blazer. He looked rested, composed, the way men did when they slept without guilt. He paused briefly near the station, acknowledging Sarah with a nod before his gaze settled on Elena. For a moment, their eyes met. Cole's expression was unreadable, but something behind it had shifted since the night before. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He turned and walked on toward the administrative wing, leaving a faint tension in his wake. Elena returned to her charting, unaffected on the surface. Beneath it, memory stirred. She had learned long ago that quiet nights were rarely an ending. They were an intake of breath. The ambulance arrived just after 9:15 a.m. It came in fast, siren cutting through the morning traffic with urgency that pulled every head in the emergency department toward the doors. The paramedics moved with controlled aggression, shouting vitals as they pushed the gurney through the entrance. "Male, mid-40s, one of them called out. Multiple blunt force injuries, possible internal bleeding. Found unconscious near the docks." The man on the gurney was large, built thick through the chest and shoulders, the kind of size that came from years of physical training rather than weightlifting. His skin was weathered, tanned unevenly, with old scars faintly visible along his forearms. A graying beard covered his jaw, trimmed short but no longer neat, and his dark hair was matted with blood at the temple. Elena felt it before she saw it. As the gurney passed her station, the blanket shifted slightly, exposing the man's right shoulder. There, partially obscured by dried blood and grime, was a tattoo, a trident. Black ink, simple lines, unmistakable. Her breath caught, just barely. She looked away at once, heart rate spiking despite her stillness. She had seen that symbol burned into skin in desert heat, under floodlights and smoke. It was not decoration, it was a marker, a VRU, Navy SEAL. "Bay 2, Sarah ordered. "Elena, I'll switch," Elena said quickly, already stepping back. "Megan can take Bay 2. I'll cover Bay 5. Sarah frowned. "Elena, I'm fine," Elena added, too quickly. She didn't meet Sarah's eyes. Megan looked startled but nodded, hurrying after the gurney with a rush of adrenaline. Sarah watched Elena for a moment longer, concern flickering across her face, then turned back to managing the flow. Elena moved to Bay 5, her hands busy with preparation, her mind elsewhere. The image of the tattoo lingered, sharp and unwelcome. She told herself it meant nothing. San Diego was full of veterans. Tattoos were common. Coincidence was not rare, but her body didn't believe the lie. Minutes later, a shout cut through the ER. "He's crashing!" Elena froze. The voice came from Bay 2. Before she could stop herself, she stepped toward the sound. She didn't enter the bay, but she stood just outside the curtain, eyes drawn to the organized chaos within. Megan was at the bedside, her face pale but focused. A physician Elena didn't recognize was issuing rapid orders. The patient convulsed slightly, then went still. "Pressure's dropping," Megan said. "Pulse is weak." Elena's gaze dropped again to the man's shoulder. The tattoo was fully visible now. The trident's lines were worn, edges softened by age. Below it, faint text curved along the muscle. "Never out of the fight." She knew that phrase. The man's head rolled slightly to the side, and Elena saw his face clearly for the first time. The beard, the crooked nose, broken and reset more than once, the scar along the left eyebrow. Her stomach tightened. Daniel Mercer. He had been broader then, heavier with muscle, his beard darker, his laugh louder. He had been the one who checked her gear before missions, who corrected her grip without condescension, who trusted her hands when things went wrong. He had also been the one who gave the order to pull back, to leave the extraction zone when the intel collapsed and the night turned hostile. Two men hadn't made it out. Elena had never said his name out loud since. She turned away from the bay, forcing her feet to move. This was not her patient. It could not be. A hand touched her arm. She looked up to see an older man standing beside her, watching the chaos through narrowed eyes. He wore green scrubs faded by years of washing, his posture slightly stooped, but still firm. His hair was white and thin, combed carefully back, and his face was deeply lined, the kind of lines that came from sun and stress rather than age alone. "Combat injuries," he said quietly, not looking at her. "They never really leave you." Elena studied him for a moment. "You work here?" "Used to," he replied. "Now I consult when they ask nicely." He glanced at her sleeves, at the way she stood. "You too?" She didn't answer. The monitor in Bay 2 shrieked. Elena stepped forward before she could think better of it. She didn't enter the bay, but she spoke. "Check his chest," she said, voice steady. "Breath sounds uneven." The physician hesitated. "We're running fluids." "He's not responding," Elena said. "It's not shock alone." There was a pause, brief but heavy. "Do it," the physician said finally. Megan moved, stethoscope shaking slightly in her hand. Her eyes widened. Right side's diminished. Elena closed her eyes for half a second. "Get imaging," the physician ordered. "Prep for intervention." The immediate crisis eased, downgraded from catastrophic to dangerous. Mercer's breathing stabilized, though shallow. He was moved for scans, the curtain drawn back. Elena stepped away, her pulse loud in her ears. "You recognized him," the older man said softly. She looked at him again. Up close, she saw the faint tattoo at his wrist, mostly hidden by his sleeve. Different symbol, same world. "Yes," she said. "Then you also know," he continued, "that if he lives, this place is going to get complicated." Elena nodded. "It already is." The man studied her with something like respect. "Name's Thomas Hale," he said. "Used to be Army Medical, Vietnam. I don't miss the war, but I miss the clarity." "Me too," Elena replied, surprising herself. By late morning, word spread quietly through the department. The man from the docks was a Navy SEAL. The information didn't come from his chart, but from the way people spoke in lowered voices, from the subtle shift in posture when passing Bay 2. Status changed everything. Dr. Matthew Cole returned to the ER just before noon. He stopped at the nurse's station, scanning the board. "Who's the SEAL?" he asked. Megan stiffened. Sarah met his gaze. "Patient in Bay 2, stable for now." Cole's eyes flicked briefly to Elena. There was no smile this time, only calculation. "Keep me informed," he said. Elena felt the weight of the moment settle over her. The trident on Mercer's shoulder. Cole's interest. The hospital's thin veneer of order. The night's quiet had been an illusion. This was the beginning. By early afternoon, Harborview Coast Medical Center had settled into a deceptive rhythm. The morning rush had thinned, stretchers spaced farther apart, voices lowered from urgency to routine. Outside, the fog had fully lifted, revealing a hard blue sky over the harbor. Sunlight streamed through the upper windows, bright enough to feel intrusive, as if it had no right entering a place where pain had already claimed the day. Daniel Mercer lay in Bay 2, surrounded by machines that breathed and beeped on his behalf. He was sedated now, chest rising unevenly beneath a thin hospital sheet. The scans had revealed more than the initial assessment suggested. Multiple rib fractures, internal bruising, and a lung that refused to fully expand despite intervention. His body, trained for years to absorb punishment, was failing in quiet increments. Elena Cross stood at the nurse's station, reviewing lab results she was not officially assigned to monitor. She kept her posture relaxed, her expression blank, but her eyes moved quickly across the screen. Oxygen saturation fluctuating, blood pressure trending downward. Subtle signs, easily dismissed by those who trusted protocols more than instincts. She remembered a desert night when Mercer had looked the same, still, pale under artificial light, stubbornly refusing to die while everything around him burned. She pushed the memory away. Dr. Matthew Cole arrived just before the shift change, his presence announced not by noise but by the sudden straightening of backs and quieting of voices. He wore his white coat again, crisp and spotless, sleeves rolled just enough to suggest readiness rather than work. He stopped at the board, scanning Mercer's name, then turned toward Bay 2. "Status," he said. The attending physician on duty, Dr. Aaron Feldman, stepped forward. Feldman was in his mid-30s, slim, with dark circles under his eyes and a cautious manner that spoke of competence tempered by awareness of hierarchy. "He's stable but fragile, lungs not responding as expected. We're monitoring." Cole nodded once. "I'll take over." Feldman hesitated, then stepped aside. No one argued when Cole claimed a case, especially not one with military implications. Status attracted scrutiny, scrutiny attracted administrators. Cole thrived under both. Elena felt her jaw tighten. As Cole entered Bay 2, Elena followed at a distance, ostensibly to restock supplies. She stood near the doorway, unobtrusive, her gaze fixed on the monitors. The numbers told a story that the room did not want to hear. Mercer's oxygen levels dipped again. "Adjust the ventilator," Cole ordered. "Increase pressure." The respiratory therapist complied, her hands moving quickly. The monitor steadied, then dipped once more. "Elena," Sarah said quietly from behind her, "let it go." Elena didn't answer. She watched Mercer's chest strain against the pressure, his body resisting in the same way it always had, by refusing to follow orders. "Doctor," Elena said. Cole didn't look at her. "I didn't ask for input." "His right lung isn't expanding," Elena continued, her voice even but firm. "Pressure adjustments won't fix that." Cole turned then, irritation flashing across his face. "And you know this how?" "I've seen it before. Everyone here has seen lung injuries," Cole snapped. "Step back." Elena took one step closer instead. "This isn't standard respiratory failure. There's trapped air. It's compressing the lung." Cole stared at her, disbelief giving way to anger. "Are you diagnosing my patient now?" "I'm trying to keep him alive." The room went quiet. Cole stepped toward her, closing the distance deliberately. Up close, his features were harder, the angles of his face sharper. He was clean-shaven, his jaw tense, a faint vein pulsing at his temple. "You're a nurse," he said softly, dangerously. "You follow orders. You do not challenge me in my trauma bay." Elena met his gaze. For the first time, she didn't look away. "Then order the right intervention." For a moment, Cole looked as though he might laugh. Instead, his expression hardened. "Enough! Get out!" Mercer's monitor alarm sounded, sharp and insistent. The oxygen level dropped again, faster this time. "Doctor," Feldman began. Cole raised a hand. "I said get her out." Elena didn't move. She reached for a tray, her fingers closing around a needle without conscious thought. Muscle memory took over, honed by years when hesitation meant death. "What do you think you're doing?" Cole demanded. "Relieving the pressure," Elena said, "before his heart gives out." Cole stepped in front of her, blocking access to the patient. "You will not touch him." The seconds stretched. Mercer's heart rate spiked, then faltered. "Elena," Sarah whispered, fear threading her voice. Elena shifted her weight, calculating angles and distance, the room narrowing to essentials. She could hear her own breathing, steady despite the chaos. She had crossed this line before, in places without rules or witnesses. Cole grabbed her arm. It was a sharp, sudden motion, fingers digging into her sleeve, yanking her backward. The force surprised even him. Elena stumbled, the needle clattering to the floor. Pain flared briefly, bright and contained. The room froze. Cole's hand slid from her arm to the back of her head, tangling in her hair. He pulled hard, forcing her face upward. "Know your place," he hissed, breath hot with anger. "You don't get to play hero here." The sound of Mercer's monitor flatlined. Something in Elena shifted. She moved without conscious decision, training overriding restraint. She twisted out of Cole's grip, stepping into him instead of away, using his forward momentum against him. Her hand clamped onto his wrist, fingers finding pressure points with surgical precision. She swept his leg, not violently, just enough. Cole hit the floor hard, shock overtaking rage. Before anyone could react, Elena was back at the bedside. She retrieved a fresh needle, her movements calm, almost gentle. "Time me," she said to Feldman. He stared at her, then nodded. 30 seconds. Elena located the insertion point by touch alone and drove the needle in. A hiss of escaping air filled the room, sharp and unmistakable. Mercer's monitor flickered, then it beeped. Once, twice, a rhythm returned. Elena exhaled slowly, hands steady as she secured the line. She stepped back only after the numbers stabilized. Cole struggled to his feet, his face flushed, eyes wild with humiliation and fury. "You assaulted me," he shouted. "You're finished. Do you hear me?" Elena looked at him, her expression unreadable. "He's alive." Security arrived moments later, summoned by someone whose hands had finally remembered how to move. 2 guards entered the bay, uncertainty written across their faces as they took in the scene. The patient stabilized, the chief surgeon disheveled, the nurse standing calmly at the bedside. "Remove her," Cole ordered, pointing at Elena. "Now." She didn't resist as the guards approached. She removed her gloves, placed them carefully on the tray, and stepped away from the bed. As they led her out, she glanced once more at Mercer. His chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm now, color slowly returning to his skin. That would have to be enough. The doors closed behind her. The corridor outside Bay 2 felt narrower than it had minutes earlier, as if the hospital itself had decided to constrict. Elena Cross walked between the 2 security guards without resistance, her hands relaxed at her sides, her pace steady. The guards were younger men, broad through the shoulders, faces tight with uncertainty. They had been trained to remove disruptive visitors, not staff who had just prevented a patient from dying. Behind them, the emergency department resumed its shallow breathing. Voices returned, low and fragmented. Someone laughed too loudly, a nervous sound that didn't belong. The monitors kept their rhythms, indifferent to the human drama that had just unfolded. Dr. Matthew Cole followed several steps back, his white coat rumpled now, a faint red mark blooming on his wrist where Elena had twisted free. His jaw was clenched so tightly that a muscle jumped beneath the skin. He said nothing, but his eyes never left her back. At the nurse's station, Sarah, Mitchell stepped forward instinctively. "This is a mistake," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor beneath it. "She saved his life." Cole stopped and turned to her. "You will stand down, Sarah. This is no longer a medical issue. It's a matter of assault." Sarah opened her mouth, then closed it. She had seen this before, how quickly lines shifted when power decided to redraw them. She watched Elena pass, their eyes meeting for a brief second. Elena gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't reassurance, it was instruction. Don't follow. They took Elena through a side exit near the ambulance bay, away from patients and cameras. Outside, the sun hung high and bright, its warmth at odds with the chill that crept along her spine. The harbor lay just beyond the parking structure, blue and deceptively calm. A police cruiser waited near the curb, engine idling. Officer James O'Connor stepped forward as the guards released her. He was in his early 40s, tall and solidly built, with close-cropped hair already thinning at the temples. A neatly trimmed beard framed a face that had learned how to remain neutral no matter the circumstances. Years on the force had given him a careful way of moving, as if every step carried options he weighed automatically. "Ms. Cross," he said, voice professional, "I'm going to need you to turn around." Elena complied without hesitation. The cuffs closed around her wrists with a metallic click that cut through the air more sharply than any shouted accusation. O'Connor noticed the lack of resistance, the absence of fear. It unsettled him. "You're being detained on suspicion of assault," he continued. "You have the right." "I know my rights," Elena said quietly. O'Connor paused, then nodded once. "All right." Cole watched from a distance, his expression finally easing as the situation bent back into familiar shape. Consequences, control, order restored. As Elena was guided into the back of the cruiser, she caught a glimpse of Bay 2 through the glass doors. Daniel Mercer lay motionless beneath the lights, chest rising steadily now, alive. That was what mattered. The ride to the precinct was silent. San Diego traffic flowed around them, oblivious. O'Connor drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the radio. He glanced at Elena once in the rearview mirror, curiosity flickering across his features. "You didn't even argue," he said eventually. "There's nothing to argue," Elena replied. O'Connor frowned slightly. Most people say that when they're guilty. Elena looked out the window, watching palm trees blur past. Most people aren't. The precinct was a low concrete building a few miles inland, functional and unremarkable. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and disinfectant, a different kind of sterility than the hospitals. Elena was led into an interview room with gray walls and a metal table bolted to the floor. One cuff was removed and reattached to a ring on the tabletop. Detective Laura Kim entered a few minutes later, file tucked under her arm. She was in her late 30s, slight, with straight black hair pulled back into a severe ponytail. Her face was sharp-featured, eyes dark and observant. She had a reputation for patience, the kind that waited people out rather than pressing them too hard. Kim set the file down and took a seat across from Elena. "You want water?" "No." Kim nodded and opened the folder. Elena Cross, 32, licensed nurse, no prior arrests, no disciplinary actions. "You keep a pretty clean record." Elena said nothing. "Dr. Cole claims you assaulted him during a procedure," Kim continued. "He says you endangered a patient and then attacked him when he intervened." Elena met her gaze. "He's lying." Kim studied her for a long moment. "There were witnesses." "There were people," Elena replied, "not witnesses." Kim's lips pressed together slightly. "That's not how the report reads." Silence settled between them, heavy but not hostile. Kim had learned to recognize when pushing would get her nowhere. "Why did you do it?" she asked finally. "The procedure, the confrontation, whatever you want to call it." "Because he was going to die," Elena said. "And I knew how to stop it." Kim closed the file. "You're saying you acted outside your scope of practice." "I'm saying scope doesn't matter when someone's heart is failing." Kim leaned back. "You're aware that doesn't play well in court." Elena's expression didn't change. "I'm aware." The door opened briefly, and O'Connor leaned in. "Detective, there's a call for her. Says it's urgent." Kim raised an eyebrow. "From who?" O'Connor hesitated. "Didn't say, just told me to put it through." Kim studied Elena again, then nodded. "Give us a minute." A phone was placed on the table. Elena looked at it as if it were an old acquaintance rather than a lifeline. She picked up the receiver and dialed from memory, fingers moving without pause. The number wasn't local. When she spoke, her voice changed, not louder, not sharper, but precise, command-focused. "This is Cross, Code Trident, Harborview incident. Patient Mercer." There was a pause. Then, "Yes, I'm in custody." Another pause, longer this time. "Understood," Elena said. "I'll wait." She hung up and slid the phone back across the table. Kim watched her carefully. "Who did you call?" Elena folded her hands. "Someone who doesn't like losing people." Kim stood and stepped out into the hall. O'Connor followed, lowering his voice. "Something feels off," he said. "She's not acting like someone who thinks this ends badly." Kim nodded. "Run her background again." "Everything." They hadn't finished when the atmosphere in the precinct shifted. Radios crackled, voices rose. Footsteps moved with sudden urgency. The front doors opened, and two men entered flanked by a uniformed officer who looked distinctly uncomfortable. The first man wore a dark suit that fit him too well to be accidental, his posture rigid, hair cropped close. The second was older, broad-faced, with silver hair and the unmistakable bearing of military command. His eyes scanned the room once, efficiently, then fixed on the interview room. "Where is she?" the older man asked. Kim stepped forward. "Sir, this is an active investigation." The man didn't look at her. "I'm Lieutenant Commander Richard Hayes, United States Navy," he said, voice calm and authoritative. "And this investigation is about to change." Behind him, the man in the suit opened a leather folder and displayed credentials that caused the officer at the desk to swallow hard. Hayes approached the interview room and stopped outside the door. He looked at Elena through the glass, his expression unreadable. When he entered, he didn't offer his hand. He stood at attention instead. "Elena Cross," he said, "you're being transferred to federal custody." Kim stared at him. "On what grounds?" Hayes turned to her then. on the grounds that you just detained a protected asset involved in an active military matter. Kim opened her mouth, then closed it. Elena stood as the cuff was removed from the table. Is Mercer stable? Yes, Hayes replied. And he's asking for you. She nodded once. That was enough. As they walked her out, O'Connor watched in silence, unease settling into something heavier. Whatever had just entered his precinct was far beyond his badge. Outside, the sun dipped slightly, casting long shadows across the pavement. Elena inhaled the air, salty and familiar. This was no longer just about a hospital. It never had been. The federal vehicle that carried Elena Cross away from the precinct moved without sirens, without urgency, as if speed itself would have been an unnecessary display of power. The city slid past the tinted windows, strip malls, palm-lined medians, ordinary lives continuing untouched. Elena sat upright in the back seat, hands free now, posture composed. Lieutenant Commander Richard Hayes occupied the front passenger seat, silent since they had left, his attention fixed on the road ahead. Hayes was a man shaped by structure, mid-50s, tall but spare, his body lean rather than broad, as if excess had been trained out of him years ago. His hair was cut close to the scalp, more gray than black, and his face carried deep lines that did not come from age alone, but from long exposure to responsibility. When he finally turned to look at Elena, his eyes were steady, assessing, without judgment. You understand this won't stay quiet, he said. Elena nodded. It never does. Hayes studied her a moment longer. Dr. Cole has already contacted legal counsel. Hospital administration is scrambling. They're calling it an internal incident. Elena looked out the window. It wasn't. No, Hayes agreed. It wasn't. They arrived not at a military base, but at a nondescript federal building near the edge of the city. Inside, the air was cool and still, the hallways lined with security cameras and unmarked doors. Elena was escorted into a conference room, where a man waited alone at the far end of a long table. Daniel Mercer looked smaller sitting down, the weight of injury pulling at his frame. He wore a hospital-issued sweatshirt over a compression bandage, his beard more gray up close than Elena remembered. Tubes had been removed, but the lines they left behind were visible, faint bruising at the wrist, tape residue on his skin. His eyes, however, were sharp and fully awake. He smiled when he saw her. It was tired, uneven, but real. You always had bad timing, he said quietly. Elena stopped just inside the room. For a second, she didn't speak. Then, you weren't supposed to be here. Mercer exhaled slowly. Neither were you. Hayes closed the door behind them, leaving the two alone. Silence stretched between them, thick with years that had never been addressed. Mercer broke it first. They told me you were working as a nurse. I thought it was a joke. It wasn't, Elena said. I needed something quieter. Mercer nodded. Didn't take. A corner of her mouth tightened, not quite a smile. No. He shifted carefully in his chair. Pain flickered across his face before discipline smoothed it away. You saved my life. You would have done the same, she replied. Mercer's gaze dropped to the table. I didn't. The words landed harder than any accusation. Elena remained still. You made a call. I made the call I thought would save the most people, Mercer said. I've lived with it ever since. She studied him then, really looked at him. The man in front of her was not the invincible operator she remembered, laughing under desert stars. He was older, worn, carrying damage that no amount of physical training could erase. Whatever anger she had carried for years had burned down to something quieter, heavier. They'll come after you, Mercer continued. Cole, the hospital, anyone who thinks you embarrassed them, they'll say you're unstable, that you overreacted. They always do, Elena said. Mercer met her eyes. Then let me speak. Let me be the one who says what happened. Elena considered that. They won't listen to you either, not yet. A knock interrupted them. Hayes returned, followed by another man Elena had not seen before. He was broad, powerfully built, with dark skin and a shaved head, his posture unmistakably military. His uniform bore no visible insignia, but his presence carried authority. Regardless. Major Isaac Rowan, Hayes said. NCIS. Rowan inclined his head toward Elena. I've reviewed the preliminary footage from the hospital. And? Elena asked. And it's inconvenient, Rowan replied calmly, which makes it valuable. He laid a tablet on the table and activated the screen. Footage from Bay 2 played silently. Cole blocking access, Elena speaking, the moment when his hand closed in her hair. The angle was imperfect but unmistakable. Rowan looked up. This doesn't disappear, but it doesn't move on its own either. Mercer leaned forward slightly. What do you need? Rowan's gaze shifted back to Elena. Context, history, why you were there and why you reacted the way you did. Elena didn't answer immediately. She looked at the wall behind Rowan, her eyes unfocusing slightly. When she spoke, her voice was even, but the room felt colder. I was a combat medic, she said. Special operations. 8 years. I left after an extraction failed because the intelligence was wrong. We pulled back. 2 men didn't make it. Mercer closed his eyes. I didn't leave because of the mission, Elena continued. I left because I realized I couldn't stop replaying it, and because quiet felt like something I'd earned. Rowan listened without interrupting. And Dr. Cole? He ignored evidence, Elena said. He ignored a patient. That's all that matters. Rowan nodded. It will matter, eventually. The meeting ended without ceremony. Mercer was escorted back for observation. Hayes walked Elena through another corridor, stopping outside a secure office. You'll remain under federal protection, he said, but understand this, we can't shield you from everything. Cole will escalate. Elena met his gaze. So will I. Back at Harborview, the atmosphere of Cetius had changed. Word traveled fast, even without official confirmation. Staff whispered in corners, phones buzzed, with half-formed rumors. Sarah Mitchell stood at the nurse's station, arms crossed, watching administrators move in and out of offices with strained expressions. Dr. Cole emerged from one such meeting, his confidence fraying at the edges. He looked tired now, the lines around his eyes deeper, his smile forced when staff passed. The control he relied on had been disrupted, and it showed. Megan Hill approached Sarah quietly. They're saying she was taken by the military. Sarah nodded. She was. Megan swallowed. Is she dangerous? Sarah shook her head. No, she's honest. Cole overheard the exchange. He stopped, turning slowly. You're spreading speculation, he said. That won't help anyone. Sarah held his gaze. Neither will pretending nothing happened. For a moment, it looked as though Cole might snap. Instead, he smiled tightly. We'll see how the investigation reads. That night, Elena stood alone on the roof of the Federal building, the city lights stretching out below her. The ocean was invisible from here, but she could smell it on the wind. She rested her hands on the railing, feeling the cool metal beneath her palms. The truth had surfaced. Not fully, not cleanly, but enough. And once unearthed, it would not stay buried. By the time the press conference was announced, the city had already chosen a side without admitting it. Rumors moved faster than official statements, carried by phones and whispered conversations in elevators. Harborview Coast Medical Center had become a word people lowered their voices around. Something had cracked there, and everyone could feel it. The atrium was transformed before noon. A portable stage rose where donors' plaques usually gleamed. Camera rigs crowded the marble floor, their cables taped down in black lines that looked like borders no one was meant to cross. Reporters filled the space with practiced impatience, checking microphones, rehearsing questions they hoped that would cut deeper than the answers. Jonathan Cole arrived 10 minutes early. He was a tall man in his late 60s, silver-haired and impeccably groomed, his suit tailored to conceal age rather than deny it. His face carried the smooth confidence of someone who had spent decades in rooms where decisions were made quietly and consequences were handled later by other people. He smiled easily, shook hands with board members, and nodded to the cameras as if they were old friends. The smile never reached his eyes. Behind him walked Dr. Matthew Cole. The contrast was subtle but visible. Matthew's posture was still rigid, his shoulders squared, but the sharp certainty that once defined him had dulled. Dark stubble shadowed his jaw, a sign of a night spent awake. His eyes flicked constantly toward the crowd, measuring reactions, gauging risk. Control was no longer effortless. It had to be maintained. Jonathan stepped to the podium as the room settled. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, voice smooth and resonant, thank you for coming on such short notice. Harborview has always stood as a place of healing and trust. Recent events have threatened that trust, and it is our responsibility to address them directly. He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. Cameras clicked. There was an incident involving a member of our staff and a patient, Jonathan continued, An internal review is underway. We are cooperating fully with authorities. But let me be clear, violence has no place in our hospital. Matthew stood beside him, hands clasped, face composed into something resembling humility. From the edge of the atrium, Sarah Mitchell watched, her arms folded tightly across her chest. She had been told, to attend as a representative of nursing staff. Megan Hill stood beside her, pale, gripping her tablet as if it could anchor her. Around them, other nurses lingered, pretending to be busy while listening intently. Jonathan's voice carried on, practiced and careful. He spoke of protocols, of safety, of accountability. He never said Elena Cross's name. That omission did not go unnoticed. A murmur rippled through the crowd when the large screen behind the podium flickered. Jonathan glanced back, irritation flashing across his face. "We'll take questions shortly," he said. The screen did not stabilize. Instead, it shifted, the hospital logo dissolving into grainy footage. A trauma bay appeared. The audio came a second later, amplified and unmistakable. "Step back," a man's voice said sharply. The image sharpened. Dr. Matthew Cole stood between the bed and a woman in blue scrubs. Elena's voice followed, calm and insistent. "His oxygen levels are dropping." Jonathan froze. The footage continued. Cole's hand closed around Elena's arm. The angle changed. His fingers tangled in her hair. "Know your place," his voice hissed, loud enough to echo through the atrium now. The room went silent. Jonathan's face drained of color as the video played on. The hiss of escaping air, the monitor's flatline, then the return of a heartbeat. Reporters surged forward, questions colliding. "Mr. Cole, did you authorize that? Is this the internal review? Was the patient a Navy SEAL?" Jonathan raised his hands. "This footage has been manipulated," he said, voice strained. "We are the victims of a cyber attack." "No, sir," a new voice cut in. The crowd parted as Major Isaac Rowan stepped into view, flanked by two uniformed officers. He wore a dark suit today, his broad frame filling it easily, his posture relaxed but commanding. His shaved head and calm expression gave nothing away. "This footage was obtained legally," Rowan said. "It will be entered into evidence." Jonathan's mouth opened, then closed. Behind Rowan, Elena Cross walked into the atrium. She wore civilian clothes now, dark jeans, a plain jacket, but she carried herself the same way she always had, spine straight, movements deliberate. The crowd took her in with a kind of stunned curiosity. She did not look dangerous, she did not look unstable, she looked tired. Dr. Matthew Cole stared at her, something between disbelief and fury flickering across his face. "You set this up," he muttered. Elena didn't respond. Rowan stepped to the podium. "For the record," he said, "the patient involved is Chief Petty Officer Daniel Mercer, United States Navy. He is alive today because proper medical intervention was taken against direct obstruction." Jonathan shook his head. "This is outrageous. You're politicizing a medical—" "Sir," Rowan interrupted, "you've politicized it yourself." Another figure emerged from the crowd, wheeling forward with assistance. Daniel Mercer sat upright in a hospital wheelchair, a blanket draped over his legs. His beard was neatly trimmed now, his face still pale but alert, his eyes locked on Matthew Cole. "I asked to be here," Mercer said. His voice was hoarse but steady. "Because I don't want anyone else dying, because someone was afraid to admit they were wrong." The atrium held its breath. "I've been treated in combat zones and civilian hospitals," Mercer continued. "What happened in that trauma bay wasn't a misunderstanding, it was negligence." Matthew stepped forward, anger finally breaking through. "You don't know what you're talking about." Mercer's gaze didn't waver. "I know exactly what I'm talking about, and I know who saved me." He turned slightly, nodding toward Elena. The applause began with one person, an older nurse near the back, her hands trembling as they came together, then another, and another. It spread unevenly, awkward at first, then stronger. Jonathan Cole backed away from the podium as officers approached him, his confidence fractured into disbelief. "This is a mistake," he said. "I built this hospital." "Then you should have protected it," Rowan replied. As the Coles were escorted away, Elena stood still, the noise washing around her without touching her. Sarah pushed through the crowd and stopped in front of her. "You okay?" Sarah asked softly. Elena nodded. "I am now." Later, as the atrium emptied and the cameras were packed away, Elena stepped outside. The afternoon light had softened, shadows stretching long across the pavement. The harbor breeze carried the scent of salt and something cleaner. She didn't know what came next, only that the truth had finally been seen, and that was enough. The city exhaled after the cameras left. By evening, Harborview Coast Medical Center no longer sounded like a courtroom. The atrium returned to its echoing quiet, the stage dismantled, the cables coiled and carted away. Outside, the harbor reflected a soft amber light as the sun slipped behind the cranes. Boats moved slowly across the water, unhurried, as if nothing remarkable had happened at all. Elena Cross walked the perimeter of the hospital grounds alone. She had declined the ride offered by NCIS, declined the press requests, declined the congratulatory handshakes that came too easily now. She needed distance, physical, mental, from the noise that had swallowed the day. The breeze off the bay carried salt and diesel and the faint sweetness of eucalyptus from the trees lining the road. It grounded her. Her phone buzzed once, a message from Lieutenant Commander Hayes. "Mercer's vitals are strong. He's asking when you'll stop by." Elena typed back a single word, "soon," and slid the phone into her pocket. Inside the hospital, the night shift assembled with a different posture than before. Conversations were quieter, yes, but they were no longer cautious. Sarah Mitchell stood at the nurse's station, reviewing assignments with an ease that suggested something heavy had been set down at last. Megan Hill hovered nearby, still a little wide-eyed, but smiling more than she had in weeks. "Hey," Megan said when Elena approached. They put your name back on the board." Elena looked up. Her name, Cross, E, was written neatly beside Bay 5, not crossed out, not replaced. "Thanks," she said. Sarah met her gaze. "Administration approved your return. Interim leadership's decision. No restrictions." Elena nodded. "All right." There was no applause this time, no speeches, just work resuming where it had paused. That felt right. She washed her hands and moved toward Bay 5, where a middle-aged woman sat upright on the bed, clutching her purse with both hands. The patient, Linda Carver, had tired eyes and a tight mouth, shaped by years of worry. She wore her gray hair pulled back in a low ponytail and flinched slightly at every sound. Elena recognized the posture immediately. Someone used to bracing for impact. "Good evening, Ms. Carver," Elena said. "I'm Elena. I'll be your nurse tonight." Linda studied her face, searching. "You're the one," she said finally. It wasn't a question. Elena didn't pretend not to understand. "I'm here to check your vitals." Linda nodded, relaxing just enough. "That's good. I like someone who doesn't make a fuss." As Elena worked, the woman's breathing slowed. The monitor settled into a steady rhythm. Elena charted quietly, the familiarity of the routine smoothing the edges of the day. Later, she crossed the hall to Bay 2. Daniel Mercer sat upright now, propped against pillows, color returning to his face. He wore a navy hoodie over hospital scrubs, the trident on his shoulder hidden beneath fabric for once. His beard was trimmed neatly, though the scar along his eyebrow still cut a sharp line across his face. He looked older than she remembered, but also calmer, like someone who had stopped outrunning his own thoughts. "You always show up when the lights are dim," he said. Elena pulled a chair closer. "I prefer it that way." He studied her for a moment. "They're offering me a transfer. Naval Hospital up north, quiet place." "That sounds like you," she said. He smiled. "It does now." A man appeared at the doorway, clearing his throat politely. He was tall and broad, with a shaved head and a careful, measured stance. A service dog stood at his side, a black Labrador, maybe 3 years old, coat glossy, eyes alert but gentle. The dog wore a simple harness marked Service. "Sorry to interrupt," the man said. "Chief Mercer, I'm Evan Brooks, VA liaison. Just wanted to confirm transport. Details." Mercer nodded. "Give us a minute." Brooks inclined his head and stepped back. The dog sat immediately, tail still, trained patience evident in every line of his body. "Name's Atlas," Brooks added with a faint smile. "He keeps me honest." Elena glanced at the dog. Atlas met her eyes calmly, assessing without fear. She reached down and rested her hand briefly on his head. The dog leaned into the touch, just enough. "He's good," she said. "He had to be," Brooks replied. "So did I." When Brooks left, Mercer exhaled slowly. "You know," he said, "they offered you a medal." Elena raised an eyebrow. "They always do. You're not taking it." "No." Mercer nodded, unsurprised. They also offered reinstatement, full honors. Elena looked past him, through the window, toward the darkening sky. I know. And? I'm staying. Mercer watched her carefully. Because of the hospital? Because of the work, she said. And because I'm good at it. He smiled then, genuine and unguarded. You always were. As she stood to leave, Mercer caught her wrist gently. For what it's worth, he said, I'm glad you were there. Elena covered his hand briefly with her own. Me too. The night deepened. The ER found its rhythm again, alarms rising and falling, doors opening and closing, lives intersecting in brief, consequential ways. Elena moved through it with a steadiness that felt earned. She no longer hid her wrists. The scars were visible now, pale against her skin. No one commented, no one needed to. Near midnight, Thomas Hale appeared near the station, leaning lightly on his cane. His white hair caught the overhead light, his lined face softening when he saw Elena. Looks like the dust settled, he said. For now, Elena replied. He nodded. That's how it goes. He hesitated, then added, They asked if I'd stay on longer, consulting. Will you? I think so, he said. Feels like the right time to stop walking away. Elena smiled, small but real. Outside, the harbor lights shimmered. Inside, the work continued. Near the end of her shift, a young boy was wheeled in, scraped knees, shaking hands, eyes too big for his face. Elena knelt beside him, her voice low and steady. He watched her with the intense focus of someone measuring safety. Does it hurt a lot? He asked. Less than you think, she said. More than you want. But it passes. He nodded, believing her. When dawn approached, Elena stepped outside once more. The sky lightened gradually, the city reassembling itself in layers of sound and motion. She breathed in, then out, feeling the day begin. She didn't know how long she would stay at Harborview. She didn't need to. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like work. And work she could do. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder or bright light. Sometimes, they walk quietly into the room, wearing worn scrubs, carrying tired hands, and choosing to do the right thing when no one is watching. This story reminds us that God often works through ordinary people, through the nurse who refuses to give up, through the stranger who steps in when fear takes over, through small acts of courage that change everything. In our daily lives, we may feel invisible, forgotten, or overwhelmed by the noise of the world, but Scripture tells us that nothing done in love is ever unseen by God. Every act of kindness matters, every life matters, and every soul deserves compassion. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on the quiet miracles around you, the ones you give and the ones you receive. Please share this story with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us what part moved you the most. And if you believe that faith, love, and courage can still change lives, subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing stories that heal and uplift. May God bless you, protect your loved ones, and bring peace to your home. May He watch over every child, every animal, and every soul who feels alone tonight. And may you never forget, even in the darkest moments, you are seen, you are loved, and you are never alone. Amen.